Hey guys, Eric here from Homebrew, and today we're going to go through part 2 of our Keezer build. If you recall, part 1 was adding the wooden collar and staining it gray to the freezer that was able to lift the lid. Now we're going to add faucets and temperature controller to the outside. Coming up next. So the first thing we're going to review actually is going to be adding the temperature controller to the Keezer.
Alright, so the things we're going to need for this project are going to be the instructions for the controller itself, an extension cable which we will splice for power, and miscellaneous tools like wire cutters, jigsaw, and a drill to start the holes off. First thing I'm doing here is just using the drill to start a hole for the rectangular controller. And we're going to use a jigsaw and a file to just help clean that up a little bit. With a little bit of finesse, we now have the controller mounted to the collar. Since we already have the drill out, we're going to locate our hole for the incoming power and CO2 line. Just remembering we need to avoid our pocket holes that we use to attach the collar.
Alright guys, one thing I do want to note is that I will be wiring it on my workbench here. If you were installing this on your Keezer, I would install the temperature controller before wiring it. I am only doing it on the workbench here to easily show you how to wire it.
For our controller, we're using the BYT-3A016. And looking at the instructions, we're going to use the most common method of wiring, just knowing that the 120 volt device that's shown in this figure will actually be the female end of our extension cable. First thing we're going to do is use wire cutters to cut our extension cable in half and go ahead and strip back both sides, the male and female side. We're going to use the male side for power for our Keezer and controller. We're going to use the female side to plug our freezer into. Next, we're going to take the white and black wire of our male side extension cable and terminate it to the power input on the controller. Next, we're going to take the female side of the extension cable and wire the black wire into one side of the switch. Since the controller does not have an earth ground, we're going to connect them from the male to the female side so our freezer is properly grounded. Next, we're going to take a black jumper wire to go from the other side of the switch and splice it into the black wire on the incoming power of the controller. Last step is to take the white wire on the female end and splice it directly into the white wire on the male end on the incoming power. Now that everything is all wired up, we just have to screw the back cover on. And hopefully you were wiring this already installed on your collar as stated previously. If not, you'll just have to undo the wiring, run it through the Keezer, and then rewire it back to the controller after it's installed.
Now that we have both of these, we can go ahead and plug the Keezer into that end. And then watch there. And plug that in right there. Now that the temperature controller is installed, let's move on to the faucets next. We've got the faucet itself, the bulkhead, an O-ring, a nut, and a 90-degree hose barb at the end. In just assembling these, obviously this is going to be all on the outside of the Keezer here from this black piece on, and then everything on the inside is going to be from the nut to the washer to the hose barb. So putting it together is easy as tightening the faucet onto the bulkhead. And of course you would do this once it was mounted, but this is just to show you how it all goes together. And then the bulkhead, you would take this back nut off and slide it into the hole. And then you've got a rubber O-ring on the back side. You actually want to add your hose barb first and then put your nut over everything, and that will clamp down on it. And before you get it tightened too much, you want to make sure that your hose barb is pointing in the correct direction. And then from the hose barb, you just attach your liquid outline to the hose barb and you're all set to go.
Now that we know how the faucet goes together, before we start drilling any holes, we want to figure out our location of how we want these to sit. Once we have a location picked, we are going to use the drill to drill through the collar. Once the location is drilled, we can then remove the nut back from the bulkhead and insert it. I don't think we've mentioned this before, but one of the tools that we highly recommend is a faucet wrench. That way you can get a good tight seal against the faucet to the bulkhead on the outside. Now that we have the first faucet mounted, now we're going to find our location for the second one and drill the hole for that.
So now I'm going to review the air side, or the CO2 side of the kegerator. Starting off with the CO2 tank itself, we have the main regulator, which we can adjust the pressure here. Right now it's at about 15 PSI. And all I did was I mounted it to the wall to get it more space inside the Keezer. Metal bracket on the bottom and a rubber strap on top to hold it there. Primary regulator, we've got a hole there for the air to go through, CO2. Opening up the Keezer itself, we have a secondary regulator. But before that secondary regulator, we actually have a air line. And that is for quick or burst carbing. So it's just teed off right there. It's a little hard to see because it's dark. So we've got 15 PSI, whatever we have on the primary, right inside of this Keezer, just on one line. And then we have a, basically what I'm calling our serving line, secondary regulator. It's at about 5 PSI right now. And then this goes into a breakout box, essentially, where we've got individual lines going to each of the kegs. All right, guys, and that wraps up our part 2 of the Keezer build. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below. As always, subscribe and like this video, give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you guys next time. Cheers.